Hello YouTube, this is Andrew from Team Blacktop YGO, and today I'm bringing you a video. I haven't done one of these in a long time. It's a discussion-based video, but I recently had a couple thoughts about the format, let's say, and about the future of Yu-Gi-Oh! And, well, let's just get right into it. As you may have garnered from the video title, I do have hope for the future of Yu-Gi-Oh! I know you'll see a lot of things on the internet right now about how terrible things are with the game. As a matter of fact, in just a few slides here, I'll show you an example of, well, one of the things people are upset about in this game. But I think even though everything from Power of the Elements on has sort of power crept everything else out of the format, there is hope yet for this game and for the future of gameplay, especially the competitive scene in Yu-Gi-Oh! But yes, speaking of Power of the Elements, yes, this set introduced two of the most powerful archetypes in the game and the current Tier 0 deck, Tearlaments. Um, Alongside Tearlaments, Sprite was released, and then in Darkwing Blast, both of these decks got new support. But I think one of the most major things to come out of Darkwing Blast were, in fact, the Bestial monsters. And then, of course, after Darkwing Blast, although it wasn't a core set, we got Magnificent Mavens, and that sort of leads us to today. The most recent YCS was YCS Pasadena this past weekend. It is currently early to mid-November right now, and Ishizu Tearlaments is the best deck. And as you can see, it is a Tier 0 format. The only other decks that are good enough to go against it are Floowandereeze, just because they can floodgate Tearlaments out of the game sometimes, and then Sprite, because, well, they can play like a ton of hand traps. And so, yeah, a lot of more casual players, and I would include myself in this, are sort of thinking right now, the format looks bleak. There's only one deck that we can play to be competitively viable. My rogue deck will not work. And yeah, those are sort of true statements. I believe I heard in one of the videos surrounding YCS Pasadena that if you weren't playing Ishizu Tier at that event, well, you weren't going to win anything, or something along those lines like that. If you want to win, you weren't playing Ishizu Tier. If you wanted to play, you weren't playing Ishizu Tier. And I think that's quite disheartening, especially to more casual players. I mean, I heard there was a huge amount of representation for Ishizu Tearlaments at YCS Pasadena, and I can't imagine people who may have been their first YCS were going there with some sort of rogue deck, thinking they can do all right, but maybe not top or maybe not do exceptionally well, but then just getting destroyed by Ishizu Tearlaments. I've never been to a YCS. I really want to go to one someday. But I really wouldn't want that as an experience. However, on the other hand, the competitive players are sort of lauding this format as something that's really good. And I would agree that whenever you have a Tier 0 format like this, especially with a deck such as Shizu Tearlament, it becomes very skill intensive, especially in the top cut of a tournament. The fact of the matter is, when everybody's playing the same deck, it comes down to the specific deck building choices and, of course, I think probably more than anything, the skill of the player playing the deck. And so competitive players, and I definitely understand this point of view, and I respect it and sort of agree with this as well, they enjoy these Tier 0 formats more because they're highly competitive. Another benefit of Tier 0 formats is that side decks don't have to be as varied. So for example, if you have a highly diverse format, you have to expect to play against a lot of different things, especially if you want to compete at the top tables of a format. There may be all sorts of different decks. Last format, before Power of the Elements, you sort of had, there were some best decks. You had Floowandereeze, Veranda Despia, Sword Soul, those were kind of the best decks. But there were also many viable rogue decks that could top any given event. But now, as we can see, as of Magnificent Mavens and the release of the Ishizu Retrain Earth Fairy cards, Tearlaments is the best deck by a country mile. So, yes, I do see 2 points of view here, and I kind of want to break down sort of why I feel hopeful about this game, while also contrasting my hope with some of the despairing things about the most recent sets that have come out and the results that these sets have brought about. So for starters, well, I want to talk about creativity. And yes, although Tearlaments are the best deck in a Tier 0 type of way right now, it is one of the most creative archetypes I think Konami's ever released. a whole archetype centered around putting stuff from deck into the graveyard and then shuffling that stuff back to fusion summon. That's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool mechanic, especially whenever the Ishizu cards facilitate that, and it sort of adds to the skill factor of the deck. It's a pretty neat concept. It reminds me a lot of other unique concepts such as Adamancipators and how they all excavate from the deck. That's one of my favorite decks, actually, Adamancipators. And it's just a very unique play style. And I think Tearlaments does have a pretty unique play style. And I'm glad that Konami is still thinking of creative ways to make decks. That being said, the way they created this deck was, well, way too good, because we can see now that with the release of the Ishizu cards, which are themselves pretty busted, this deck has become tier 0. However, to contrast this, one of the other best decks right after the release of Power of the Elements, Sprite, I may be biased, but I hate this deck. This is probably the most brain-dead design choice for a deck that I've ever seen or heard of. Oh yes, number 2, level 2, rank 2, whatever, link 2. Yep, special summon, special summon, special summon, negate, negate. It's absolutely stupid. It is the most brain-dead choice of deck strategy I've ever seen. And yes, sure, there are some levels in the game that are more heavily supported than others. For example, level 4, many consider to be the best level in the game. However, if you gave level 4s the Sprite deck, but for level 4s, they would also be equally as broken. It's not fair to other levels, especially when the playstyle of Sprites is, I think I would describe it as Helmet, as it is. And for those of you who don't know, Helmet really describes a deck that requires probably 0 to very little thinking ability to play. Many people call it Clifforts. I didn't play at that time, but many people called Cleese a Helmet deck because their idea was to just summon towers and sit on it, and they could do it very easily. Another example of a Helmet deck would kind of be Sword Soul, although it does require a little bit of strategy, probably more than Sprite does, because Sprite is just absolutely stupid. They just special summon and special summon and special summon, and even though they're not as good as Tearlament right now, I think the sort of play style behind Sprites is stupid. It's idiotic, and I really don't think the person who designed the deck, who had this idea for, yep, level 2 special summon, is a very creative thinker. But that being said, it was very interesting to see, at least out of the gate, and this is one of the more positive things I think about coming out of Power of the Elements, is how creative players have been in order to maximize the success of the deck. For example, using things like the dangers in the early builds of the Tearlament deck, or the Frog Engine, which we saw Ronin Totem get banned on the last Forbidden Limited list because Sprites were so dominant. But seeing how these decks sort of can play with other archetypes is really interesting, and I'm glad the player base has that sort of creativity, and I think Konami does, of course, know how these decks are going to interact with each other, especially the TCG, because they can see the results from the OCG, whereas the OCG can't see results from the TCG, of course. But I think it's really interesting how these decks can work with others. But that being said, because they work so well with these already powerful archetypes, they become immensely less fun to play against and immensely less fair. They become immensely more powerful. So I think that might be a little bit of a problem too. One of the other sort of disheartening things I'm seeing coming out of new card design by Konami is the fact that all these decks are getting hand traps. Yeah, Havness is a hand trap, Kelbeck is a hand trap. The entire Bystial deck is hand traps. I don't like this style of play. Yes, there is the complaint and the obvious problem of the game that going second is very difficult to do, especially against these powerful turn 1 decks. But I do remember back to 2019, 2018 when people were complaining about summoning Dingirsu, the Orchestra of the Evening Star, on the opponent's turn. That was one monster, and all it did was send something from the field of the grave or attach a material. That's it. Now you have these silly Ishizu Tearlaments cards, which can play on the opponent's turn just because the opponent does something, and they get to make insane boards. There's a meme going around, not really a meme, but sort of a picture that's been memed of the most recent YCS Pasadena where these cards are just strewn across the table. The commentators don't know what's going on, and I feel sorry for the judges because how are they supposed to know what's going on either? It's just kind of ridiculous, the state of where power is right now and how much people are playing on each other's turns and how many effects are going off at once. But I will give credit to the meta players, and I agree with their point. It takes a lot of skill to play these formats, but I do think that these cards are power creeping the existing cards entirely out of the way. And yes, that's how card design works. And yes, Konami has to sell product, but it's a little unfair to see it happen this quickly. Like I said, we were seeing Branded Despia and Sword Soul and a smatter of other rogue decks last format, but those are all gone now. Those are no longer viable. And I think it's a little sad to players who have enjoyed those decks and have played them. Yes, you may make the argument that they've gotten their time to play them and that this is the new format now, but this new format is oppressive because you don't get to play on your own turn, or your opponent also does get to play on your own turn. So I don't really like that aspect of card design, how, yeah, every deck gets a hand trap now and they get to play on the opponent's turn. I think it's silly and I think it's not good for the game. That being said, one aspect of card design I do like is these in-deck spell trap removal in these searchable cards that can do this sort of thing. And I know that, this isn't sort of a new phenomenon. Strikers had searchable spell trap removal. Other decks have had this also, but the fact that we're able to out, oppressive floodgates like Mystic Mine with these types of cards is preferable, I think, especially when people were complaining immensely. I know I've used that word a lot, but immensely, they were complaining about Mystic Mine last format, and Konami didn't ban it. But we can see because of cards like this and other sorts of removal cards and just how the format shaped up, people need not worry about oppressive floodgates as much. I think one of the problems surrounding the game right now in terms of floodgates or regarding floodgates is the fact that we have lingering floodgates like Abyss Dweller or Dimensional Barrier. Yes, people sort of don't like the idea of Abyss Dweller getting banned because it does shut down the Tearlaments matchup, but whenever Tearlaments can make that card against a Tearlaments matchup, it's a little silly. If I were Konami, I would probably ban Abyss Dweller. I would probably ban a lot of floodgates if I were Konami, but we all know how Konami feels about floodgates. They set skill drain to 3, they keep Mystic Mine at 3. They do ban some floodgates like Imperial Order, but it's good to have these in-deck searchable back row removal cards. Although I do think both these cards are kind of broken in their own regard. Sprite Smashers, for example, being able to non-target, non-destructive remove any card. Tearlament's Heartbeat for being able to trigger the Tearlament's effects. Yes, I know they work when they're archetypes, but it's just kind of silly, like that this is where the game's at right now. But like I said, I do think this is a good part of card design, and I think it should be something that is in every sort of competitive archetype going forward. Now, speaking of Mystic Mine, this card is sort of like a double-edged sword, right? We saw it last format, played quite a bit, and people hate playing against it. But you see, this format, we could use a card like Mystic Mine if it were viable to go against these very oppressive meta decks. And I think the fact that Konami's putting these removal cards in archetype is testament to how they're going to sort of address floodgates on the Forbidden Limited list in the future. So I don't think people are going to complain about this card as much until these current best decks with these in-archetype removal cards get severely hit on the Forbidden and Limited list. Okay, so I do like the creativity of the decks we've seen. However, there are some very non-creative decisions, such as the entire Sprite deck. Once again, I hate that, it's not creative at all. Absolutely brain dead thought of a deck strategy. But one of the things that I am very hopeful for, and this is sort of the last thing I'll talk about in this video, is that, well, because we have all these very powerful decks, Konami has absolutely no excuse to unban some of these previously very powerful decks. For example, cards like Block Dragon, Harp Horror, and even some of the Dragon Rulers themselves. These are cards that can probably come off the list and still not make a dent in the Tearlament Ishizu meta. I mean, yes, you could make the argument that cards like, well, all three of these cards on the screen right now, and many other cards that are on the Forbidden Limited list, they can be abused by the Tearlament deck or any other deck that mills or any other deck that's popular right now, but I will make the argument that, yeah, that's probably not going to happen, though. I don't really foresee a Tearlament Adamancipator or a Orcust Tearlament or anything like that I think that'd be kind of silly. Although, I don't know, maybe Orchestrator would be good if hardcore was in the game. I don't know about that. But regardless, Konami doesn't really have any excuse to keep good cards banned now, because the cards they have out right now are so much more powerful than any of these cards ever were. Well, with the exception of Block Dragon, maybe. Anyway, I would I would encourage people, kind of like how they've done with Mystic Mine, kind of like how they've done with Firewall Dragon in years past, to constantly be reaching out to Konami. Don't verbally abuse them or anything like that. I'm absolutely not advocating for that, but any sort of official social media post, be commenting things like ban this, ban that, unban this. I would sort of keep that at the forefront of Konami's mind. I don't know if they actually listen to us or not. Odds are they don't. But if you are putting these ideas out there, and not only Konami, but other people are being able to see them, that might sort of create this wave of momentum going, and these decks and these ban cards may be addressed. I don't know though. These things do, however, in total, give me hope for the future. The way the archetype design is going with in-archetype removal cards, that gives me hope. The way that there's really no excuse for popular banned or limited cards to stay on the ban list, that gives me hope. But there are some things that sort of make me despair about the future of Yu-Gi-Oh! I love this game. I have a lot of friends that play this game, a lot of close friends. Some of my closest friends are the ones that play this game, and I'm very happy I've been able to bond with them through this game. And I want to continue to play this game in a competitive and enjoyable way. So that's all I've got for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like and maybe subscribe. I know I don't upload a whole lot. And just leave a comment down below saying whether you agree or not with me, and what are some of the things you're hopeful for or despairing for about this game. This has been Andrew from Team Blacktop YGO, signing out.